The fighting was between the Islamic Jihad and Israel, but was Iran pulling the strings? We have Jason Brodsky with us, Policy Director of United Against Nuclear Iran. Good evening to you.
Good evening.
What's the Iranian point of view here, do you say?
Well, I think it was particularly noteworthy that Palestinian Islamic Jihad Secretary General Ziad al-Nakhala was in Tehran as Israel faced off against Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And that was a signal from Tehran, I think, and it was likely pushing Nakhala hard behind the scenes to escalate. And that's why we saw a lot of the increase in rockets fired into Israeli territory from there. And I also think that there was likely pressure on Nakhala to keep up the conflict going, but he was under pressure likely from Hamas via Egypt to stand down, and so that was likely the dynamic.
All right. Well, apparently there are two Iranian proxies in Gaza, Hamas and Islamic Jihad, and apparently they did not work together. What does that mean for Iran?
Well, I think that's important to note because Hamas receives support from Iran, but it has to balance equities given that it controls Gaza, and it has to also, it's under the patronage also of Qatar and other powers, and has to manage daily life there. So it's constantly balancing a different set of interests from Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is really a wholly owned proxy of Tehran. But as I said earlier, the fact that PIJ felt the need to cease the fighting was definitely telling of Hamas's pressure behind the scenes.
On a different note, there are reports in Arabic media about a ballistic missile that accidentally exploded in Yemen, killing Iranian experts and others. What do we know about that?
Well, I think we're still getting details, but it's consistent with a pattern of incidents over the years. Iranian experts have died and Lebanese experts have died. And these Lebanese experts are likely Hezbollah operatives affiliated with Unit 3800, which provides training to Iran's proxies and partners. So I'd be interested to see if the Lebanese experts that were part of this report, who also reportedly died, were a part of that unit. And it shows that despite the ceasefire, Iran and Hezbollah are continuing to arm and train and meddle in Yemen.
Well, we'll see what happens there. Jason, stick with us because we're going to talk about the nuclear talks. Negotiators with Iran are optimistic now about an agreement to impose limits on Tehran's uranium enrichment. International Affairs correspondent Batya Leventhal has more on that.
Optimism. That's the latest sentiment among top EU and Russian negotiators involved in renewed talks to revive the 2015 nuclear agreement with Iran. But away from the negotiating table in Vienna, others are not convinced.
We are moving backwards in relation to disarmament. We have now 13,000 nuclear bombs in the world, and we are seeing huge investments in modernizing nuclear arsenals. So this is the moment to say, stop it.
Negotiators resumed talks over Tehran's nuclear deal on August 4 after a months-long standstill. The key question for the current round is whether Iran will continue to shut down investigations into past violations and whether the West will give in to Tehran to preserve the dialogue between the two sides.
The time has come to take one last effort and to take clear, decisive political decisions in the capitals of countries which participate in the JCPOA. It is our sincere hope that the negotiations this time will lead to results very soon.
Meanwhile, since the US withdrew from the nuclear accords in 2018, Iran has ramped up its uranium enrichment, almost enough for an atomic bomb, raising many fears over what happens if a deal fails.
In case there is the JCPOA not be extended, this would not necessarily mean that the IAEA is being expelled from Iran. There are a number of inspections and inspection capacities that we will continue to have. The problem is that with the JCPOA, there are additional transparency measures which I deem as extremely important, very necessary, because of the breadth and the depth of the nuclear program in Iran.
But with no master key to unlock a long-lasting accord and no expiry date in sight, the looming question remains with each session: deal or no deal?
So back to you, Jason Brodsky. Should anyone be optimistic at all at this point?
I don't think there's any reason to be optimistic. I think the fundamental political decision has remained with Tehran for some time. The variation of the same deal has been on the table since at least March, and Iran's supreme leader has still not chosen to take that deal. So why he would choose now to take the deal when he hadn't before is unclear. And I would also say that Iran's strategy in the last round of talks that just concluded today has been to appear to concede on IRGC sanctions and guarantees, only to double down on the closure of the IAEA safeguards probe. And it feels that by doing that, it can buy time and space for more concessions. But the EU has been adopting a tone that's firmer than I had ever seen in the past. And so I think Western patience is beginning to, is up, really.
Yeah, really, because it looks like the West is losing interest in this. Do you see any eagerness on part of the United States to be engaged in this?
Well, I see, interestingly enough, the EU, as I said, is really, their patience was up. And I can tell from the statements, they were saying that this is the final text. There will be no reopening of the text. And that's the end of this conversation. But Iran wants to continue the conversation and is indicating that they still have comments, they still have problems, they still have qualms with the existing deal that's on the table. So that's the dynamic that we're going to be in. And I think that the calendar is important to watch, because the IAEA Board of Governors meeting is coming up on September 12th to 16th. And so when they mean weeks, that's this lead up to that meeting is likely the timetable.
Even getting back to the JCPOA, will this be sufficient from your standpoint?
No, I think I'm against a return to the JCPOA. I think as problematic as the deal was in 2015, it would be worse to return to it now when the sunsets have already started ticking, and we would be providing Iran with sanctions relief to the tune of billions of dollars that would enable it to spend on its partners and proxies abroad, like Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And there is no strategy that's been articulated by the international community, the United States and the E3 especially, as to how to counter Iran in the region after a return. So that's been my concern all along.
And we don't really see the stick. Maybe there's a carrot here, but where's the stick?
I don't see it as well. The United States has been rolling out a series of sanctions designations, but there is no credible military threat on the table. And I think the E3 and the EU don't haven't imposed sanctions on Iran for a very long time. The last time it imposed sanctions was in 2021, and before that was 2013. So Iran doesn't feel it has anything to fear by continuing to drag out the talks, and that's been the calculation all along.
So in terms of timeline, we should look to September? September,
I think, is the key timetable.
Okay. I guess we'll see you before and after, to be honest. Jason Brodsky, thank you very much.